the murder of Andrew Gardner. Things were going great in Andrew's life until he met a certain woman called Claire Nichols. So Andrew and Claire started dating in 2005, and it wasn't long until they started living together. And Andrew kind of slotted in nicely to the family. He kind of took on that father role to Claire's 3 children, and it wasn't long until the verbal abuse turned into physical abuse. Claire would beat Andrew regularly. It would be almost on a daily basis for the smallest infraction of her rules. She is just literally trying to get as much control over Andrew as physically possible. But it wasn't just starvation that Claire was putting Andrew through. She was also depriving him of his sleep. Claire wanted to completely isolate Andrew from his friends and family, from everyone, from the world. Okay, so now we get to 2008. So we are jumping forward a few years. Claire, Andrew, and the 3 children move house. This would be known as the House of Horrors of Claire Nichols. So that was in July of 2008. And then the other significant thing is that Claire starts to move in a couple of people, and these couple of people, they're evil as well. So the first evil lodger, shall we call them lodgers, was 22-year-old Simon Nichols, who was Claire's younger brother. Now Simon, like most people, was very scared of Claire. He was very intimidated by her, and he would pretty much do whatever she asked. And then the second evil lodger that moved in was Stephen Martin. And as soon as they both moved in, they started abusing Andrew along with Claire. They essentially became Claire's henchmen. But Claire decides to have a baby with Andrew. So Claire has been abusing Andrew now for 3 years, and she decides to have a baby with him. So at some point in 2008, Claire gave birth to a baby girl, and Andrew absolutely adored his daughter. His daughter actually gave him something to live for, because he was being tortured every single day. He kind of lost the will to live, but since his daughter was born, like, that was what he was living for. And it is when Simon and Stephen move into this house that the abuse and torture just goes up another level. So first of all, Claire has obviously moved her ex-boyfriend into the house, and it wasn't long until they were together again. But they weren't just together, they were doing it in front of Andrew. But it wasn't just the humiliation and the hurt in Andrew's eyes that she got off on. She actually would get by inflicting physical pain on Andrew. So Claire would constantly come up with different punishments for Andrew, and these wouldn't just be inflicted by her, they would also be inflicted by her henchmen, which were Simon and Stephen. And both Simon and Stephen were more than happy to do her bidding for her. But it gets worse, because Claire would make her children get involved in the So the abuse continues on until we get to March of 2009, and by this point Andrew is really not in a good way. He is completely malnourished, he's suffering from starvation, and it's thought that at this point Andrew wouldn't have the strength in his body to leave even if he wanted to. There is only so much that his body could go through before completely giving up. On the 13th of March 2009, Claire decided to launch one final vicious attack. She would scream at Andrew, "You lazy, I wish we hadn't met." And very sadly, hours later, Andrew lost his life. So following this vicious attack, the group had realized that they had gone too far, and they came up with a plan on how they were going to be able to get away with this. They call 999. They pretend on this 999 call to be so concerned because Andrew has just gotten home and he's been mugged and he's been attacked. And immediately the paramedics know that this story that Andrew was mugged is a little bit suspicious. They think things are not quite adding up here. So the police are immediately called, and as soon as the police arrive, they start treating Andrew's death as a murder. And immediately Claire, Simon and Stephen are all taken in for questioning. The 3 perpetrators try to stick to their story that Andrew was mugged, but the police were having none of it, because at this point an autopsy had been carried out on Andrew's body, and the full extent of his injuries were revealed. The police also used luminol on Claire's house to find any hidden traces, specks of blood. Even though Claire had done a really good job at cleaning up the crime scene, they still found blood. And this confirmed that Andrew was not killed by a mugging. He was killed. He was and abused by Claire, Stephen, and Simon. So the case went to trial, and this is when the full extent of Andrew's suffering, of his injuries, finally came to light. And next, Claire, Stephen, and Simon had to take the stand because all of them had pleaded not guilty to this, and to no surprise, they all turned on each other. They all tried to blame somebody else for the abuse. They all tried to claim that they themselves were innocent and it was the others. And by the end of it, the jury were left in no doubt that all three of them were guilty. But Mick Philpott was born in 1956. He was described as arrogant, a loudmouth, cocky. Mick thought that he was God's gift to this world, and especially God's gift to women. And this is when Mick finds 19-year-old Mairead Duffy. And Mairead is incredibly vulnerable as well, because she had literally just gotten out of an abusive relationship. And it wasn't long after the relationship started that Mairead and her son Dwayne had moved into Mick's house. Not long after meeting Mairead, Mick starts another relationship with a woman, or should I say girl, called Lisa, who is only 16 years old at this point. She was a single mom at the time, and Mick targeted her. He openly starts seeing Lisa as well as Mairead. And within weeks of meeting Lisa, Lisa moves into the house. Pretty much immediately after Lisa moved in, she also fell pregnant. And then following this, Mick decided to propose to Mairead. So after the wedding, Mick goes home with his new wife Mairead and his girlfriend Lisa. Well, pretty much immediately after both of them had given birth, they were both pregnant again. And then after giving birth to those children, they were then both pregnant again, and then again and again. Over the space of 5 years, Mairead gave birth to 4 of Mick's children, and Lisa gave birth to 3 of Mick's children. He saw these children as a source of income. In the UK, there is this thing called child benefits, where the government will help families in need and give them money to look after, bring up their children. And for every additional child you have, the government will pay you more money because you have more children to look after. So Mick goes on to have 2 more children with Lisa and Mairead, and things stay like this for another 5 years until we get to February of 2012. And this is when Lisa decided that she had had enough. She wanted to leave Mick. So one day she took her 5 children to the swimming pool, but she didn't take them to the swimming pool. In actuality, she just left, and she never came back, and Mick absolutely lost it. He started threatening her, saying things like, "One day you will pay for this, how dare you do this to me." So ultimately, Lisa did end up going to the police about Mick because she was genuinely scared for herself, but most importantly, her children's safety, because she knew what Mick was like. So he decided that he was going to start a legal battle to try and get custody of the 5 children. So Mick had a court date, which was the 11th of May 2012, and at this court date he was expected to present evidence of why he should get custody of the children. On the evening of the 10th of May 2012, Mick was just at home in 18 Victory Road. He was there with Mairead, and he was there with his friend Paul Mosley. Paul and Mairead both knew about Mick's plan, and they were both happy to go along with it. At around 3:30 a.m., Mick decides that that is the time that they should carry out the plan, and the most unimaginable tragedy occurred. So Mick picked up a petrol can and he started pouring petrol just inside the front of his door and at the bottom of the stairs. Then, whilst all 6 of the children were asleep upstairs, the 3 adults set alight the petrol and then made a quick escape from the house. Once they were outside, Mairead called 999 to report that her house was on fire and that 6 of her children were inside inside. When Mairead was on the phone, neighbours started to notice that the house was on fire, and two of the neighbours, who happened to be brothers, Jamie and Darren Butler, rushed over to help. Both of them are noticing, why isn't Mick helping? So the two brothers run around to the back of the house and they notice that there's already a ladder propped up against the house that goes up to an upstairs window, and that window has already been smashed. And firefighters do arrive on the scene pretty quickly, and the firefighters manage to battle through the flames and they bring all 6 children out of the house. Dwayne, who was the eldest child in the house, he was 13 at the time, he did survive the fire and he was rushed straight to hospital. But tragically, the 5 younger children did not make it. So the original plan of Mick was to start this fire in his house, make it look like it was Lisa, and at the very last moment, Mick was supposed to climb up the ladder that was already there and save all 6 children and be the hero of the story. And Mick and Mairead were offered transport from Derby to Birmingham so they could go with Dwayne. But when Mick was at the hospital, he barely spent any time by Dwayne's side. Instead, he was going around laughing and joking around the hospital and being incredibly inappropriate with the nurses in the hospital. And very, very sadly, Dwayne also passed away 3 days after being in the hospital. Following the death of Dwayne, Mick and Mairead, but especially Mick, went on with their unbelievable behaviour. Both of them were seen laughing and joking, and the police had started their investigation because obviously they quickly discovered that the fire had been started with petrol. The news of the fire had made national news, and because of the heartbreaking news, donations were flooding in. So 5 days after the fire, Mick decided that he wanted to hold a press conference. So before the press conference, Mick met with the police officers that were there running the press conference, and from the get-go the officers thought that Mick was acting strange. So the police officer that was at the press conference just found all of this behaviour just incredibly suspicious, and from this point on, because of the press conference, Mick became a suspect. So the police look into Mick's background. They see that he was convicted of attempted murder, and that alone made them suspect Mick even more. So they needed some way to prove their suspicions of Mick. And the solution that the police came up with was to get secret recordings of Mick and Mairead. They wanted to bug the hotel room that they were staying in. So the fact that the police were even allowed to bug this hotel room says a lot, says how strong the suspicion was. So they booked the hotel room and the police just sat back and listened. Well, whilst Mick and Mairead were in the hotel room, their friend turns up, Paul Mosley, and all 3 of them were recorded in that hotel room. And in those recordings, all 3 of them were heard colluding with each other about trying to get their story straight. Mick was heard saying, quote, "Are we sticking to the story? Have they got any evidence on you? They've got nothing on me." Following these recordings, all 3 of them were arrested and charged with manslaughter. They all pled not guilty, and a trial date was set for February 2013. At the trial, Lisa testified against Mick and Mairead. Heather, the woman that Mick had groomed from the age of 14, also took the stand to testify. And after the jury had heard all of the evidence, the jury found all 3, Mick, Mairead and Paul, guilty of manslaughter and not murder, because the original plan wasn't to kill the children. They wanted to save the children. Both Paul and Mairead were sentenced to 17 years and Mick was sentenced to life in prison, but he has to serve a minimum of 15 years. And it's just incredibly sad that 6 innocent children lost their lives because of a narcissist, somebody that thought they could play God.